Alright, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 8, Lesson 1. This is solving equations with rational coefficients. So, when we are solving for a variable, we always undo the operations used with that variable. So, for example, this is 7.4x equals negative 62.9. This right here really means 7.2 times x. So how do I undo a times, or how do I undo a multiplication? Well, the opposite of multiplication is division. It's the order that, or it's the operation that goes with it in the order of operations. So when I do this, I need to undo this operation. So this is 7.4 times x. So I'm going to do divide by 7.4. And whatever I do to one side of the equation must be done to the other side. It has to be. It always has to be. Some students like that there's a line down the middle like this. So when I do something to one side, it has to show up on the other. So if I go ahead and do this, 7.4x divided by 7.4, it just leaves me with 1x. So I just write down x. And then on the other side, negative 62.9 divided by 7.4, that gets me negative 8.5. So that's what x represents in this case. Example 2. It says Steven spent $116 on boxes of baseball cards. He paid $14.50 per box. Write and solve an equation to find how many boxes of cards he bought. Well, step 1 is we need to define what our variable is. I like to use a variable that represents what we're looking for. So we're looking for how many boxes of cards he bought. So I'm going to say that my variable is b. And that represents the number of boxes bought. The next thing we need to do is our equation. So whenever we write an equation, there's always going to be an equal sign in it. On the left side, usually, is the parts that combine together in order to get me the total. And then on the other side would be the total. So if I go through and look at this problem, looking for important information, I can see that that $116 is important. This is how much he spent. And I see that that $14.50 paid per box, that's also important. So $14.50 per box, and that's the important thing here. So one of those numbers is the total. If he spent $116 on baseball cards, that's the total. On the left side, the $14.50 per box. This per means to multiply. So $14.50 per box would be $14.50 times b. So now I can solve the equation. So 14.5b equals 116. Divide both sides by 14.5 because it's 14.5 times b. Now I want to get b all by itself, so I have to undo that multiplication, and that becomes division. So then I'm left with b on the left side. 116 divided by 14.5 is 8. But I'm not done yet, because this number represents something. This number represents how many boxes Steven bought. So my last step would be Steven bought 8 boxes of baseball cards. Now, that's with decimal coefficients. What about fraction coefficients? So when I have a fractional coefficient, I'm still going to go through the exact same process. So, for example here, this is 1/5 times y equals negative 12. So to undo a times, I'm going to divide. Now, the tough part about dividing fractions is it's a little bit confusing. But if we think back to our rational numbers chapter, if I do divide by a fraction, that really means that I'm multiplying by the reciprocal. So instead of doing the division, I don't want to do that. I want to multiply by the reciprocal to both sides. The reciprocal is when I switch the numerator and denominator. So the 1 in the numerator turns into the 1 in the denominator. The 5 in the denominator gets moved to the numerator. So the reciprocal of 1 over 5 is 5 over 1. And remember, what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now, the nice thing about multiplying by the reciprocal, 5 times 1 is 5, 1 times 5 is 5, and simplifying that fraction of 5 over 5, I will always get 1. So I'm left with just y. Multiplying the right side now, negative 12 times 5 is negative 60, and 1 times 1 is 1, so simplifying that fraction, I get negative 60. So, what I did was I multiplied by the reciprocal. Example 4, solve negative 3/4 x equals negative 9/20. Again, multiply by the reciprocal to both sides. This over here becomes 1. Again, remember, negative 3/4, the reciprocal would be 4 over negative 3. This negative sign sticks with it. So I'm left with just x. On the right side, I have negative 9 times 4, which is negative 36. 20 times negative 3 is negative 60. What I can do here is I can pull out a factor of 2. Actually, I like to pull out a factor of 12 instead. So, negative 36 divided by negative 12 is going to be equal to 3. And negative 60 divided by negative 12 is 5. So x equals 3/5. Make sure that you simplify with those negative signs, and make sure that if your coefficient out front of your variable is negative, the reciprocal is also negative. All right, this is the end of lesson 1. If you have any questions, please let me know.